is only so loud, so you're going to have to lower your voice. Welcome. I want a show of hands of our new people who are here with us tonight. Welcome. Thanks for coming. It's a treat to have you all. For you, I'm Kelly Seacat. I'm the director of the Lucas Artists Program at Montalvo, and I'm thrilled to have you guys here. This is a real treat for us. We're expanding our docenting program with the opening of Bruce Munro at Montalvo Stories in Light, and we're really excited about it. I have a team of folks. Nothing happens at Montalvo with a whole group of people working with it. So I want to introduce Leah Almond. She is our Associate Director of Marketing. She's taken on the docenting program and really done a beautiful job building it up over the years. Leah is, I came flying into town from LA, and she's doing her best to get my PowerPoint up on this screen so I can talk to you. My colleague Lori Wood is here with us tonight. Lori's the manager of the residency program and a terrific colleague for me. She's also a literary whiz, and I've asked Lori to come in and be part of us because, as some of you know and some of you don't know, one of Munro's inspirations for this exhibition was the Chronicles of Narnia. And I think that we can take much deeper as docents and really start thinking about fantasy in interesting ways, and I think Lori can take us on a journey with that. And then I want to introduce Charlie Wagner. Charlie's our Director of Education, and we're working very closely with education on this program to make sure that our school tours and our family tours and all of our docenting tours have the techniques that we want to see come through. She's joined by Laura.
Hi.
Say Amador. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Laura Amador.
Yeah, Laura Amador, who's our, tell me your title.
Education coordinator. So you'll be seeing me around, especially on the field trips and the family nights. But
and I've had the pleasure of witnessing Laura engage people with art on the grounds, and I will tell you she's fabulous at it. And then Mark Broder, who's also a coordinator in our education department. Fantastic. So the three of them are a power team. We are going to look at the agenda for tonight. We're going to break it up a little bit. Karen McQuaid, Lane. Amanda Lane is our newest colleague, and she is working as volunteer coordinator with us as well. She's joined Karen McQuaid, who many of you know, to help with the volunteer force that we're going to need to run the Bruce Munro exhibition. So with Karen away in France and me in LA, we're putting our pieces together, and I want to just go through the agenda and let you know what we're going to cover, what we're not going to cover, and how the evening's going to go for you. So I will take just a moment of time to review a little bit what we did last week for those of you who are new, let you know a little bit about where you can find resources of what we covered, and then we're going to go through these top several things. We're going to talk about a movement known as Light and Space. Talk a little bit about our history. Look at some other artists who are working with light, so you have a context with which to hold Bruce Munro. Who is Bruce Munro? How did he come to be? How did he become an artist? We're going to talk a lot about Bruce tonight. We're going to talk about how we met him, why we met him, why he's here, why we're doing this, and what was his inspiration. And then we are going to move on and talk about fantasy. And if this PowerPoint doesn't cooperate, we're going to talk about fantasy first thing. So we're going to break, and after our break, the education team is going to walk you actually out of this room in to see some of the recent installations in process or completed, and give you time just to talk about them. It's not until next week that we will actually go through piece by piece the 10 works that will be on Montalvo's grounds. So it's giving you some time to take on Munro, who he is, why he's here, and then we'll move to next week where we will talk and go deep into each work, how it relates to Narnia, and what's actually happening here on site for the exhibition. This is our second of 4 trainings, and we're just thrilled to have you with us. So I guess I go first. Anything else?
Doing great.
Yes, I'd love some. So last week, Karen, who how many of you know Karen McQuaid? Karen's fabulous. So she started the night by saying, so I want to do an icebreaker, and for those of you who are new, we're going to have to get your influences another day. And I want you to tell me about the most moving light show you've ever seen. And we had responses like the night sky, right? Now if I can figure out how to move it. That's moving in the wrong direction. The aurora borealis, right? How many have seen the aurora borealis? It's ridiculous. Fireflies, right? I had an opportunity this summer to see my very first firefly. I was in Philadelphia with my daughter. I saw one. She went in there. I was astonished, and this would be something I wouldn't believe. We also talked about big celebratory moments, right? Fireworks, and what they've meant to us throughout life. And Diwali, and I mentioned Diwali because one of our lectures that goes along with Munro will be about, celebrations of light and doing that during the Diwali festival. So I think light is one of those things. It delights people and it builds wonder and it sort of brings you into a space. And quite honestly, I feel like that's something we could all use at this moment in time, is to be transported, be taken to another place, be somewhere that can be fantastic for us. And then I mentioned something because I felt like my job is to keep it about the art, bring it back to the art. And I mentioned an installation I had seen at ASU University. And this is by an artist named James Turrell. What you're looking at is a sky space. So James Turrell is about 75, and he's been working in light and space since he was a very young man, always exploring light, how it moves through space. And so what you're seeing is a structure that's built on the campus, and there's this magical moment at sunrise and sunset when this canopy starts to change colors. And you're seeing pink, but it goes through a gradation of yellows, oranges, blues, pinks, purples. It's stunning until the sun is completely set and you see no more. He's a master of light and space. This has been his work forever. It's what he's done. So, for instance, this is a piece he did in 1966. It's at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. He took two projectors, projected them into a corner to create this box. It's an optical illusion. You didn't quite know what you were seeing. You didn't quite know how deep it was. You didn't quite know what was happening, but it was something like you've never seen before. Fast forward to 1999, and he's working in projections in a different sort of way, adding in multiple colors. Again, another work by Turrell in 2013. And because I can't get enough of him, and because if I had an astonishing goal, we would build something like this at Montalvo, which is called a sky room. And he's created these spaces, these architectural structures all over the world. You go into one, I believe this is the De Young, that was the work I was intending. Has anybody seen it? Go to the De Young, go to the sculpture park, you don't need to pay an admission to go in, and you'll find this installation. You come in the door, and he's framed the sky. So whatever's happening on that day is what you're gonna see. You're gonna see the clouds moving, you're gonna see a pure blue sky, you're gonna see rain coming through, you're gonna see the sun straight overhead. And if you're lucky and it's night and you get a chance, you could even see the moon straight overhead. So it's an incredible kind of space.
Kelly, does that color ring on top, does that move?
So
The one on
this,
the right? Yeah.
because I was, pulling images and getting really excited, this is a proposal. It's a proposal for a Danish museum. They're building a brand new museum, and they're also collaborating with Turrell in the construction. This is a 75-year-old man. This is a man who's been working in light and space his whole life. All of a sudden, he's taking a leap from here to here. And this, from what I can tell, is actually an installation on the rooftop. You would walk in, and you would go through the colors of the rainbow. So, how magical is that?
So that's actually in Denmark somewhere.
Is it built already?
It's built.
Thank you. I stand corrected. This exists and we should all get on. It just came off the plane. We should all get back on it and go to Denmark next. Because how fabulous is that? Did you go in it?
I didn't go. He went. He said it was amazing.
He went in it.
Wow.
Oh, you'll have to see if he has photographs you can share with us because, right? So, yeah, really fantastic. Terrell at this stage in his life does all of his works to bring them back to his property in Arizona where he's building something that he's calling Rodin Crater. He essentially bought a huge swath of land. It is a crater in Arizona, and he's coring through the earth and creating these moments where the sun comes in and the sun comes through. This will be his legacy. This will be an earthwork that he will leave for people to just value year after year forever. Really a fantastic artist. Another is Bob Irwin. And Bob Irwin has been working, same, light and space, looking at light, looking how light penetrates the space. He's using scrim. This is in 1977. This is a piece that just opened in Marfa, Texas, again, using scrim. This piece opened 2013, 2014, somewhere around there. It's gorgeous. If you ever make a trip to Marfa, Texas, you should go and see it because it's amazing. Again, this is Bob Irwin, and there he's working with neon, just looking at light. So it's electronic light, but it's also daylight. It's how light plays in a space, how light sort of delights, how it changes a space. This is a local artist, San Francisco-based, Jim Campbell. And he's also playing with spaces, creating spaces. You can sort of see a woman here standing within the lights, spending time, just exploring. This is another piece that sort of undulates on the wall and you become part of the work. Jim Campbell you might recognize because he recently was commissioned to do an astonishing work on the top of the Salesforce Towers. So this is a big deal. You go up to San Francisco, this is the tallest building if it remains standing. And this is the tallest building, and there he sits at the top. He's reflecting the people around him and just creating a play space in light to delight. So I just came back from Los Angeles. Oh, that's not what you're supposed to be. This is a great piece. This is not necessarily a light and space artist. This is an artist who works in media. This is an artist who collects cast-off materials, brings them together. But this is also an artist who's playing with light, looking at what you can do, taking LED boards and bending them and flexing them and seeing how you can create an installation. Daniel Kanagar is a past fellow of ours, and I wanted to show you this work because we recently worked with the Sprato Foundation. They're opening a new headquarters in Mountain View, and a piece very similar to this will be installed in the coming weeks. It's 566 Castro Street. It's in their lobby. I think it opens in November. You'll be able to go in any day, play with it. It pulls YouTube videos. You type in, I want to see everything about Montalvo Art Center, and it will send you every video connected to Montalvo Art Center. They'll pop up, and then they'll immediately become abstracted. And this is a painting, and this is in motion. And this is not stagnant. So it's, again, using light, using color to really delight. Here's another artist you might know. His name is Leo Villarreal. He's playing with light. He's playing with light on sort of objects, almost painterly, creating spaces. These are also fluid. They're not stagnant. They move. He's working with neons in different kinds of ways, also moving and creating installations you can enter, spaces you can go into, become part of the light. And the work of his you absolutely know.
Ellie, is that one up at in Tacoma? The one in the center?
I can't answer that for sure.
Okay.
But I'll tell you this.
I think
You've seen it. This one in the center. It's amazing. So I'm going to go back through this. I'll give you the names of all the works and where they're located. So as you have reference to these on our website, we have a Docent page.
Did everybody receive the email from Karen that had the link to the Docent resource page? Okay, very good. So we're going to be posting the video recordings of every session there, and we'll also be posting the PowerPoint and additional handouts as they're necessary and relevant. So that's your go-to resource website.
And this will be there, and I'll update all of
Okay.
these images. So this is Villarreal, right? This is one of the most astonishing lightworks that we know in San Francisco. It went up, and people couldn't believe that it was going to happen, and it stayed up. And it stayed up much longer than it ever intended to, and I'm pretty sure it may not ever come down, at least not for a very long time. They took it down, and people got very upset, and it went back up. So Villarreal is another one who's just really interesting, creating space, creating just places of wonder, places to play with light. Here's the image. I got a little ahead of myself. So I was in Los Angeles this weekend, and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art worked with an artist named Chris Burden. Chris Burden's never worked in light, really, in his life. He's worked in all kinds of assemblage, all kinds of collected pieces, all kinds of sculptural objects. He started his career as a young performance art, really, you know, one of those performance arts that's just cutting edge. He had somebody shoot him in a gallery once when he was a very young man. That's how he sort of got his claim to fame. People knew who he was because he went through such a dramatic kind of work, testing out the body, testing out the drama of an act like that. Over his lifetime, he did what artists do, and he collected. And as LA changed its face, changed its landscape, became modernized, took out the old gas lamps, he saved them. He went to the junkyard, he bought them, he kept them on his property, and then he put together this installation of 202 old-fashioned street lamps. It's called Urban Light. So for me and for the people I was traveling with, this is an astonishing work. This now represents Los Angeles. When you go down there, this is what you see to know what Los Angeles is. So Montalvo really wanted to do something astonishing. I'm trying to figure out what that is, what that looks like for us. How do we do it, and why do we do it? And I think for us, in our 5-year plan, in a bunch of retreats with our senior team, with our board leadership, it was time for us to do something that felt big, to bring attention to the work we're doing. Because we've been doing a lot of work over the years. From the time of the senator, he's been commissioning works for the grounds. This is a bust to John Muir. I mentioned Hetch Hetchy. Who knows the history of John Muir and Hetch Hetchy?
He was against it.
Yeah, so John Muir is at the very top of our Poets Walk in our forest, which the senator planted. I think it's astonishing, actually, that he created a bust to him, put it here permanently on his site, and that's a work that'll never leave. In 2010, when Angela arrived, she and I put the first work on the ground in sort of my tenure, and it was a moment when people felt a real distance from Montalvo, and it felt important to bring a very close local artist in, and we brought in David Middlebrook. And he put about 8 or 10 works on the grounds, and this is a piece that he put in our cactus garden, and it remains. It's called The Broken Wing, and it just sits there. It's a piece we purchased because when it landed in its spot, we decided it never was going to go anywhere. So we think about the kind of work we want on the ground. Do we want a permanent collection? Do we want works on loan? Do we want to commission works? This is another work that landed on our property. It's a work by Stephen DeStabler, and it's important work for me that you know it because it sits in the front of our villa, and it's a significant investment for us. It's a significant piece of our collection that we put here. Stephen DeStabler was Bay Area clay artist. Later in life, he moved into bronze. He wanted to take the clay that he was working with and make it light. Saw a lot of works by Giacometti this weekend. You see that in this work. It's got a little bit of, it's a little bit of a decay. There's something going on there. It's very classical like the villa, but it certainly has a tension with the villa, and I think that's fabulous. And his widow, his gallerist, and I placed it there. We sort of felt like this is one that probably needs to stay where it is. We're trying hard not to do that very often, but this is a piece that we now own. It's part of the permanent collection and will remain in front of the villa for years to come. These are works that we have on loan. This is an artist we saw this weekend, Tim Hawkinson. That's a sweet little work called Sweet Tweet. It was a work he created right after his daughter was born. It's a band of 5 birds coming out of her mouth. He said it was sort of his moment of thinking about wondering what her voice would be, who she'd be as she grew. And this is a piece by Kenny Sharp, far more whimsical piece, both on loan to us from the artist. Montalvo's got a long legacy of working with artists, hosting artists, having artists here, and being a space for artists. Through the Lucas Artist Program, we're commissioning artists every year. This is a project by Cameron Hawkinson, not related to Tim. And it's a piece he created when he was here with us. It was at a time when Montalvo was, really developing their gardens and grounds. We were looking at cast-off spaces, and he and I together selected this tree as a place for this work called Control Towers. Cameron is a gorgeous artist. You can see one of his pieces, the perfectly crooked painting up there. It's actually an etching with several images by Cameron. They were just studies, ideas, thoughts about what could happen at Montalvo. And in that piece, it's not there, in his notebook was this drawing, and it's what he wanted to create. And so we went down that path. Many, many artists are working in their notebook, keeping those notebooks. We went to the Getty Research Institute. They're collecting all of the notebooks of Klaus Oldenburg. It's top secret. But these are where the ideas are generated. This summer we put in a garden by an artist named Maria Magdalena Campos Pan. She's a very significant Afro-Cuban artist, now working at Vanderbilt. This is her second peace garden she's ever built. She does it as a performance activity. We planted it, and however we can manage, we're going to keep the deer from eating it, and we're going to grow it, and it's going to become a piece that remains on site. We've done lots of temporary installations. Some of you may remember this was our dress tent in our edible garden. And all these beautiful dahlias.
I wish that would stay.
This
That's
is
one of my favorites.
This is tucked somewhere.
I
She knows
heard.
where it is, sort of. May have to come back one day. We did the rolling counterpoint. We're often doing works and we're taking them out into the community. You may have seen the rolling counterpoint that sits in Lot 1, and that was on a trailer hitch. We took it around the Bay Area to host conversations. So this is the work we're doing, and it seemed to us, we have who is it, Peg? We've been working with the county, partnering with the county. We reinstalled Susan O'Malley's Healing Walk. If you're ever up for a hike, it's just right behind here. You go up into the forest, takes you to the Lookout Trail. I had an artist rave to me about what a beautiful poem it was. And this summer we created a work by a composer. It's called Four Bridges, and you can walk through the forest and see it. It's important for me that you kind of have a sense of what else is here on the grounds, because Munro is a moment in time, and I think it's all a building of what we've done. This is a piece that came on Montalvo's grounds long before I did. Arrived here, I think, 2005. It's by an artist named Steven Seagal. And Steven actually created, must have been 2005, 2006. Steven created a hurricane on the front lawn made of newspaper with the Katrina headlines. And it was massive, and it was gorgeous on the front lawn. And this is the remains of the newspaper headings. Put them in a sort of bay of laurels, and it's still there today, not far up the trail. Another kind of work we did where we just keep pushing the grounds, thinking of creative ways to expand our grounds. That's our Creekside studio. So we wanted to do something astonishing. And we talked about who that artist could be, what it could be, what we could do, And Bruce Munro came to mind. Bruce Munro was bought to us by one of our trustees. And, okay, I have one of our trustees said, Kelly, I saw this project at the Longwood Gardens in Philadelphia. Could we ever invite this artist? And I said, well, yeah, we could think about it. And then a couple months later, for those of you who work with me, you understand, she came back and she said, Kelly, I really think this could be an interesting artist. And then we talked about it a little, and then I said, yeah, we could think about inviting him. And then this is Bruce as a very young man, probably when he started thinking about his life as an artist. And this is Bruce when I met him. So he had an exhibition at in Scottsdale, Arizona. He had an installation at the Desert Botanical Garden, and Kathleen Santor and I got on a plane and we went out to meet him. And we went to the opening and we looked at the work, and it was astonishing. And not only that, it was beautiful. And for all of my love to push the envelope and to test new things and to give artists a new platform, it felt like if we were going to go big, we had to go big in a way that would bring everybody in. And Bruce can do that. So Bruce is an interesting story as an artist because I would say he's a young artist. He's been in his practice for about 20 years. And he actually went to art school. I have to look at the bio. So Bruce graduated art school in 1982. He went to Bristol Polytech. He studied painting. Spent a lot of time painting, but he sort of knew painting wasn't really his thing. And if I were to talk about Bruce Munro and what's coming, I would almost always say he's painting with light on our ground, because I think it's what he's doing. And so he dabbled, and he tried out all kinds of things. He was a chef for a little while. He did all kinds of pursuits. He took a course at Saatchi & Saatchi, really a big art collector, big influence in the art world, in illumination techniques, and he loved it. So this is about 1985, just a couple of years out of art school. But he also moved to Australia with his wife, or excuse me, he moved to Australia. He met the woman who would later become his wife, and he started having children. And people who are smart, they do something else when they start having children, like figure out how they're going to support their family. And Bruce started moving in that path. He started working in lighting. He moved into becoming an artistic director for a large lighting association. And in 1999, he lost his father. I want to rewind a minute. This work behind you, he calls a field of lights. So as he's having this life in Sydney, he's keeping his notebooks. He's making sketches of everything he's encountered, every idea that comes through his mind as he's sort of keeping steady, making a living, taking care of his family, being a lighting designer, learning and becoming quite a genius at a trade. And Bruce and his wife went out to the outback of Australia, and they visited a place called Ayers Rock. It's quite a sacred space. And he had a vision when he was there that he would, he'd love to one day illuminate that entire rock and really give it sort of its presence that he dreamed of. He put it in his sketchbook, he walked away, and he, went on with his life. So here's Bruce, in 2015. And this is his, the first time he ever showed his work in the United States was at Longwood Gardens, was in 2012. And this is 2015, he's in Arizona, and we had the opportunity to meet him. And he's fabulous. He's like a child. He loves to create these fields of light. He takes these sticks of LED, he illuminates them with a bulb, and he brings gardens to life. He also loves nothing more than a garden as a landscape to activate. He feels like they're a magical place for people to come and spend time. Bruce's, I'm going to show you some of his different works that he's created. Always large-scale installations, always site-specific. These are called water towers. They're about this tall. They've got sound, so they've got a sonic element, and the lights change, so they're not stagnant. Bruce is also an avid collector. These are like liter bottles of soda bottles with lights filling them up the side. You're gonna see a similar kind of work on Montalvo's grounds.
Do they have water in them?
They don't have water in them, but they have the sound of water. And they've got sort of a look of water. This is a work called Lilies. He'll do a similar kind of work called Lilies, and we'll talk about it next week. Bruce is a collector. He decided he wanted to work with the reflective quality of CDs. CDs are going out, you know, we might as well do something with them. And this is a piece he installed, wasn't at Longwood Gardens, but these are lilies that he tied the CDs together, illuminated them. So they not only in the evening were projected upon to light, but they caught the light of the day and became really pretty special during the day.
Kelly, is the light coming from an external source? It's not.
I think you're seeing daylight. You can see the hill is illuminated as well. So this is the work during the day. It's coming sunlight. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that a Longwood, did you say?
No.
Well, I want to say it's at Longwood, but I don't think it is. I think it's at Long Knoll in Wiltshire, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I will make sure you have all of that information on the PowerPoint.
Because at Longwood they have a pond.
They do have a pond, and he did a lot of work around the pond. There's our other colleague, Kelly Hudson. She wanted to leave before 9, so I think she accomplished her goal this evening, because we're all things Munro all the time.
All the time. I just want to say thank you to everyone. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you so much. And that is Longwood.
That's Longwood.
I stand corrected, that is Longwood.
That is Longwood.
And this is Long Knoll at Wiltshire. And this again, he put out a call. He wanted to work with CDs, and CDs came pouring in, and he created this landscape. And it's kind of fabulous because it can light itself, right? He's working with just the reflection of light, sunlight during the day. In the evening, he's got an electronic light source, and he's able to activate that space as well. And this is Wattleson Manor. Again, you're looking at CDs. That's a bad image. Has anybody visited the Wattleson Manor?
No.
This is a very long road you take to get in.
Where is it?
It's in the UK, and I'm not exactly sure where. Near Oxford. This is the work he created. These are hand cut and illuminated lucite clothespins. So they're cut of different, neon colored lucite. For him, Bruce has a great sense of humor, and he's always got something he's anchoring to. He really wants to be a little cheeky often. He wants to push, be a little bit irreverent. These are pieces, and this work will actually be part of our exhibition. It's called The Gathering of Clans. And when you go through, you will hear sort of cries of cockatoos, and these will be illuminated through black light, and it's reminiscent of those early days at Saatchi and the work he learned while he was there. There they are again. Configuration. Who's been? Somebody in this room who's been. There's Ayers Rock, right? He achieved it. He opened in 2016, 25 years later, the Field of Lights at Ayers Rock. So this is how artwork happens. It doesn't happen quickly, it happens over time. It's a germination, it's a dream, it's a vision, it's an idea, and it comes to be. And so in the spring of 2016, they opened the Field of Lights at Ayers Rock. And it was last spring, it was slated to come down, and they said, well, we're not ready for it to go. We'd like it to stay. So it's now will be up until 2020.
How much space does that cover?
It covers a massive amount of space, and it's about 50,000 LEDs.
What's that like for the wildlife?
Well, that's a good question. Things are on timers, much as they'll be here. They go on, they come off. I think the wildlife probably get curious. We had a light work on our hillside the other night. One of our artists, Mateo Ruby, created an installation, put it on the hill, was bringing all of the artists up to visit his studio, and the deer were there, checking it out, sniffing it. I imagine because of the sacred nature of Ars Rock, there was a large group of people working with Bruce, thinking about the impact, thinking about what it would mean, thinking about what it means for the rock and the site and the area, as well as the landscape and the wildlife. He's an incredibly sensitive man, and these things would be very important to him. He works in small kind of notions. This is a work that hangs. This is a work that I want to say is called, I can't remember. I'll give you the name of it. Works in these light showers. Really, really beautiful installations, LEDs, which he puts a little bulb on the end. This is in a cathedral. This is at the Longwood Garden. Just stunning kind of installations. This harkens back to his work in lighting design, really thinking about illuminating a space, making light the central figure in the space. And in 2014, Bruce started working in Morse code. So what you see artists do is sort of move from one kind of medium into another, and I think this is very interesting. We will have some works like this. They'll actually be right out on this pavilion. We'll have 3 installations, 4 videos running in each, and it's Morse code is what you're seeing. So we'll go through those. We'll look at those next week together. But he's taken Morse code and he's found a way to sort of illuminate it and illuminate the language. So he's actually got language built in because language is very important for him. Thinking about language is very important. So when we went to Scottsdale, we said, so Bruce, would you ever want to come and visit the Montalvo Art Center? We're in Silicon Valley. It's really great. We have artists. We love to support artists and give them space to dream. And he said, well, actually, I'd like to think about it. So we gave him all of the information. We met him the next morning for breakfast. First thing, he pulled out his notebook and he started thinking about the place, listening to us describe it, sketching little sketch. And he agreed that next time he was in the United States, he'd come for a visit. And so in the spring of 2016, he came and visited Montalvo. And he stayed in our residency. And he spent about 3 days with us. And he arrived at night, and he got brought up to these very modern artist studios, and he, went to sleep, and he woke up in the morning, and he did what he likes to do, and he went outside to explore the garden and see where he was. And when he came up the pathway, he turned the corner, and you will get documents tonight that are both Bruce telling the story, me telling the story, and the story is he turned the pathway, he saw the villa, and he was certain he had arrived at the place that was his childhood memory of the Dawn Treader. This was the house from the Dawn Treader. And he couldn't believe he was here. There was something he felt about the place. It's not the first artist we've heard say it. It's a magical place. And that was something that absolutely inspired him. Took some more time. He walked the ground. He walked around to the side of the villa, and he saw the old stained glass. And there was the Dawn Treader. Really the San Salvador, but we won't tell him. So that was it. It sort of nailed it for him, and this was what he wanted to do. Now, Bruce is an artist who holds memories dear. Almost every work he describes, he's talking about where the memory came from, where the idea came from, who was involved, was it his uncle, was it his brother, was it his third cousin 4 times removed? There was somebody there with him. And Narnia is one of those pieces for him. It comes up in his work over and over again. It's magical. Those books were magical, and they sort of exported him to another world. And for Bruce, the imagination and space for the imagination is incredibly important. And you see that at the light. So this is called the Good Seed. You probably saw it when you were driving in today. Went in. You saw it last week too, didn't you? Yeah. So the Good Seed is Monroe's idea of that ever-burning lamppost. So the lights were on when you came in tonight?
No.
Lightly burning, just barely. They burn, and they burn quite lightly. And this is our good seed. It's what the seed might have looked like that the lamppost grew from. This is it installed in Minnesota, Sunset, gorgeous picture. And this is from my phone. So there's our lamppost. That's sort of entry into our magical world. And I think at that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori Wood, talk just a little bit more, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go out and explore. And before you leave tonight, you're going to come back here. We've got lots of handouts for you, from the press release to our text for our brochures that we'll have, to our audio transcriptions of Bruce actually talking about each work himself.
This is repeated in a number of places. I saw there's a whole bunch of lamps. Single lamps.
Well, isn't that a coincidence? So this is repeated all over our property, and it's simply a coincidence.
The
So,
ones over
so
here
for
are-
Bruce, this was inspired by Narnia. This is the good seed. It really, for him, grew out of this idea. Apparently in the 5th or 6th book, do you know, Leah? There's a moment when they talk about how the lamppost grew, right? Somebody threw the post in the ground and outgrew the magical lamppost that never stopped burning. And this for him, it's got, several layers to it, but it's simply a coincidence that all of our light fixtures look just like it.
Wow.
And most of our light fixtures, in particular at Charmaine's Garden Terrace and our old West Lawn area, will be turned off, so you will not see them. But those two in the front of the villa may remain on. Yeah, how's our time?
Oh, I think our time is great. We are at 7:46.
How are you guys? Would you rather have a break right now or in a couple more? No break. Ready? Thank you.
So Leah's going to pass out a handout to this side of the room, and I'm going to pass this, if you could pass them down to this side of the room. So I am Lori Wood, and I get to take care of the artists while they work at the LAP. And it just happens that while my colleagues Kelly, Seacat, and Donna Conwell are visual arts people, I'm a literature person. And I'm a literature person because when I was 12, Grimm's fairy tales meant a tremendous deal to me when I was young. How many people read Grimm's fairy tales or some other fairy tales when you were young? And how many people were actually influenced by that in terms of how you saw yourself, what it meant to be a good person, what we dreamed for? How many people were influenced? How many people know they were influenced by that? So our exhibition by Bruce Monroe is called Stories in Light. And one of the strengths of Montalvo is that we are a multidisciplinary art center. So something interesting about the Bruce Monroe piece is they reach deeply into other disciplines, into the disciplines of literature. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about fantasy literature, about fairy tales, and why this is significant, and give you a little background. This may be really interesting for you as you're talking to other people to help them imagine for themselves what these stories are. Notice that we didn't call this a story in light. This isn't just Bruce Monroe's idea of what Narnia is. This is stories in light. And so we're welcoming our visitors to explore what these might mean for them and to create their own spaces. I was really influenced by fairy tales, and then when I was 12, I started to read fantasy literature, and actually the Narnia books were really important to me. I couldn't tell you why, and in fact, most people can't tell you why. It just touches something really deeply inside you, these stories of quests, of magical appearances, of magical friends that help you along the way. They were deeply meaningful for me, and they gave me strength in ways that I didn't understand, but deeply valued. And at that time, fantasy literature wasn't considered real literature, and that really bothered me. I also read Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea. How many people read the Narnia series? Okay, so that was published in 1968, I think. Is that true? No, 1950s. Yeah. The Earthsea trilogy was published in 1968. So fantasy literature goes quite a ways back. But what was interesting to me is, why are these tales not taken seriously? Why do they figure only for children? And that became an object of passionate study for me. And so when I went to Harvard, I majored in comparative literature. And one of the things I was really trying to get at was, what is it about these tales that so deeply touched me and it seemed to animate a universe in ways that I didn't know how to talk about, I didn't know how to articulate. So I went and I did study literature. And there's a couple things I want to talk about. So I want to talk about what is a story? So what Bruno Bettelheim says is that a story is primarily a work of art. The fact that this short compressed tale, a fairy tale, is a work of art. This short compressed tale is passed down from really through oral traditions over many centuries and sometimes thousands of years. And it gives strength to generation upon generation of people and inspires wonder and introduces people into a world of enchantment. I don't think many people talk about why that is really. So it was only really in the last 100 years that people really started to think about what is the function of fairy tales and why do they wreak this magic on us? What gives them their power? So Bruno Bettelheim wrote this book called The Uses of Enchantment, and it was really a seminal work on trying to understand the power of fairy tales and the tales in children's lives. And let's think of all ourselves as children right now. We think of our adult lives, but I think we all have that formative child in which we heard these stories. And Bettelheim looks and sees some of the very violent, very strange things that happen, like particularly say in Grimm's fairy tales, and how these things affect children's lives. And he's found that actually these tales help all of us when we are young, helped us deal with the difficulty, the wonder, the unpredictableness, the magic of being a child. The giants helped us understand, battling against giants, these young people are dealing with these huge people that have all this power over them. All the stories of sibling rivalry in fairy tales help children to process what was happening in their own lives. And Bettelheim goes through fairy tale after fairy tale and talks about these patterns. He also was a Freudian, so he also thought about Oedipal patterns and how it helped children deal with this. You can either buy that or not. I was more of a Jungian from that perspective, but anyway, it had something to be said for that in terms of how they deal with the stories of how they relate to the mother, how they relate to a father. In so many stories, we'll have a parent that casts the child out, and the child in that way is set out on their own quest, and thus their quest begins. They must find their way home. And Bettelheim really believed that children were building a self, building a stable coherence of self as trying to understand how to juggle all these difficulties and create a coherent personality that was able to deal with the very real complexities of our world. So fantasy literature goes back as far, probably, so 800 BC was the Odyssey and the Iliad. So we had stories of the monsters and the Cyclops and all these that we were taught in the Western world in school. Those were formative, mostly oral tales that people told each other. In Vedic mythology, there was a Panchatantra from 300 BC. There was the Arabian Nights from the 8th to the 14th century. There was Beowulf as these stories grew on. The Mort Arthur in the 1400s was an important story about the King Arthur tales. And all of these were teaching people something. Mort Arthur is very much teaching chivalrous behavior and what it means to go out on an adventure, how one should act. And you'll notice that this is also going on in Grimm's fairy tales, and it's also going on in the Narnia books. Of course, then Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Weird Sisters in Macbeth, and Prospero and The Tempest, those are all magical references in literature. 1812, the Brothers Grimm pulled together tales that were centuries old and just pulled them together into one source. Mary Shelley in the 1800s did Frankenstein. This is when we started to think this as literature, right, and not stories, so something started to shift. 1865, Lewis Carroll wrote Alice in Wonderland. So suddenly it's a completely other world coming up. And this is how they define fantasy literature, is that it takes place in, at least partially, a completely other world, like the books of Narnia. It starts in London, but then it goes into this fantasy land in which some other rules are afoot. Hans Christian Andersen came in there, and then 1900, The Wizard of Oz. Peter Pan in 1906. The Hobbit in 1937. That was really influenced by the stresses of the war. In 1938, The Sword and the Stone, and Lord of the Rings in 1954. So you're starting to see a complex elaboration of another world, book upon book, story upon story that takes place in completely another world. This then took off into all these, I mean, look at Harry Potter. Also, also happens very much like Narnia, partly in London, part in an imaginary world. And there's these portals that go between that world and this one. And then C.S. Lewis, 1950 to 56, The Chronicles of Narnia. And then 1960s, Ursula Le Guin's The Earthsea Trilogy. I'm just picking out ones that I have heard of and that affected me that most people have heard. There's many other examples of these stories and how they go forward. So one of the things that Bruno Bettelheim says about, where is his notes here? About what these stories do. And I'm going to have to put it somewhere. Here it is. I'm listening to his book, The Uses of Enchantment, again. I read it in college. I'm listening to it as I drive around. He says that the seeds of these stories are planted early in life, and they'll give fruit over time at the right moment. And he says that these stories will help give validity in children to important feelings, promote insights, nourish hopes, reduce anxieties, and in doing so, enrich the child's life at the moment and forever after. And this is something that we will explore as people step onto these grounds and they see a world animated in light. It will welcome them back to astonishment, which is something we don't actually really experience very often. What it means to enchant. I get to see this all the time as the artists work together because the things they create are quite remarkable. Just on Saturday night, the artists decided to make our car into a star car, and they projected stars onto the Ultima. They asked me, can we put little star? I thought they were this big, right? No. So if you ever want to see our star car now, yeah. So they projected stars onto this car, actual constellations, real constellations scientifically, and then they painted it in glow-in-the-dark light. Artists are all, that is a moment of enchantment. And I could not but just marvel at what the level of joy it has when we are able to freely play. So part of your role will be to welcome visitors to these grounds, which are magical anyway, really magical anyway, that will be transformed into this light. So the last thing I wanted to tell you about, and how much time do I have?
7:57.
Okay. Take a look at the handout that you all have, and I just realized I gave my only one out. Can I borrow that one from you? So this handout looks like this, is the hero's journey. And so this actually comes from Joseph Campbell's work on the mono myth. He looked at fairy tales and stories from deeply all over different cultures and came up with a very common set of motifs that he found happen in many, many myths and stories that come throughout human prehistory and history. And this is incredibly important. And if you will look at this, and we can talk about it later, some of you want to talk more, many of our Hollywood movies are actually built on exactly this storyline. You start with a hero who's in the normal world. He receives a call, he or she receives a call to adventure, and a threshold guardian welcomes him into another world and asks him to exit his normal world. He usually begins with a refusal of the call. I will not do this. I can't. I'm too small. I can't. And then something happens that forces him out of that world and forces him to step in and do something into another world. Then he goes into a series of trials, and you'll notice this in so many stories. At a certain point, he'll achieve the underworld. It gets to the nadir, the lowest point, in which, in fact, this is the dark night of the soul in many stories, in which he feels that nothing is possible. He's helped by different magical helpers. He goes through processes of revelation, of transformation, atonement for something he may have done wrong. Then he starts to come back up into the upper world, and they call this the return threshold. And then he comes back, and sometimes it will say he has the grail. I don't think the grail is on this. But you go into the underworld, through those sufferings, you grab the grail, and you come back up into the world, and you bring something new to humanity. So if you look at Star Wars, this is a classic study of Star Wars. So George Lucas, this is exactly like Luke Skywalker. They come to his world, They say, we want you to help. He says, no, that's a refusal of the call, right? And then, bam, his world is bombed, and there's no way to go back. He must go into the magical world, and he must go forward. So George Lucas used this very deliberately. Since then, and while Joseph Campbell wrote this in, I don't know, the 40s, like came up with this myth, it's been used, they are using this in Hollywood all the time to animate story arcs for movies. You can go in and see so many movies in which you can yourself identify this. This also works for the Narnia books, which we'll talk about later. So I welcome you to take a look at this, think about it, start looking at the stories you hear, and start looking for some of these motifs. We'll talk later about the Narnia tales, but this will be a way for you to welcome all the people who visit into this world of enchantment and try to understand what enchantment can do for us now, what its uses are for us now.
Perfect. So Mark and Lauda are handing out a one-page that we recommend keeping as a resource. I understand some of you are collecting a folder, a book, something of the sort of resources. We're hoping that this is the first piece of a few that will come from this team that may give you some very fresh ideas for ways to engage with the public around this work. I know that Leah and Kelly and Karen and Amanda went through a lot of our institutional philosophy last week. We had an event, so some of these words may be directly replicated from that, but we did want to look specifically at some of our philosophies within the education department and how we can all work together to support those. So essentially, of our kind of greatest belief is that the arts are a remarkably effective vehicle for making connections and making relationships. And yes, that applies in the classroom when you are very young, but it also applies for us as adults as we engage in artwork. And what we want to do with all of you, as well as what we do among our greater staff, is look at what are ways and mechanisms that we can foster that to the best of our ability. So our belief system is that the best learning, and again, I'm going to encourage you to think about this for youth, but also think about how we all learn this way. That some of the most effective learning that we the most effective mechanism that we see for learning is something that you are directly part of, something that you participate in the learning process. And how do we have the public, how do we have students, how do we have an adult participate in an exhibit like this, to participate in their own learning? And how can you take something, especially in this setting, that is untouchable, how do you make it experiential? And so what we want to work with, again, with all of you, or work through with all of you, are two primary mechanisms that we find to be really effective when looking at artwork that you can't touch or experience as explicitly. And those two mechanisms are inquiry and dialogue. So I think first and foremost, we want to underscore how important it is to understand your audience. In education terms, we would call this an assessment of pre-existing knowledge. And I can't count how many times, and I'm sure you all have experienced this, that you walk into that museum or you walk into that wine tasting room and someone who is very well-intentioned starts telling you things you already know. And you'd rather use that time to get to the heart of something. So one of the first things we really want to look at are some pre-assessment mechanisms, and they're very simple. So if I start to use like really firm education terms, remind me of that, and we can look at more general applications. This is as easy as, have you been to Montalvo before? Have you seen artwork like this before? Do you know about Bruce Munro? And really just kind of gauging where your audience is at. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, your application on the grounds will be twofold, that either you are on the property as a resource to provide very extensive information around the exhibit, or you will be giving direct tours. And in both of those scenarios, I think there's applications for everything we're going to walk you through, but most especially on the tours, taking that pre-assessment gives you the biggest entry point into making large impact for those folks that you're touring around. So that was kind of one thing we really wanted to underscore. And then we wanted to look at, again, with all of you folks, why is it important, or why is it critical at this point in time to rethink the role of a docent in an art exhibit, and most especially this one? If it is, and I was reminded by our managing director who popped in to say hello, if you aren't aware of the app or haven't downloaded the app, you should, and we can give you that resource. But in an era where I can download the app, I can Google Bruce Munro before I come here, I can look at all of his works, where is the place of a docent? And some of this is meant to be open dialogue in terms of your experience and where you see those shifts taking place. Any firsthand experience with this?
Well, I think that, first-hand experience is going to a museum, and like you said, they tell you about the artwork, you might know about the artist, but what is your impression? When you see that artwork, what does that do to you? And then opening up the dialogue that way. So it's not so much about the facts, but what your experience is, and you can't do that on the internet. Right? So that is one of the things I think the business will do.
One of the greatest things about art is how it makes you feel, and if you're reading about it online, you're not going to really feel anything until you get on the grounds and feel the magic, and the wonder of the, and then you might think about Narnia or whatnot, but it's not until you really experience it firsthand and really elicit the emotion.
And I saw a third hand over here.
So you have to, I'm a docent here too, but so you have to gauge the reaction of your audience. And if you start talking about Bruce Munro and I start wondering, then you talk more about the lights. So that's it. Basically, you have to do that.
Right. And I'm going to take the last one over here.
I think one of the tricks is like so many places you go focuses on people telling you how you should perceive everything. And I think it makes it very difficult for people to really experience it when there's someone saying, this is what he's trying to tell you, or this is what you should see. It's not easy to have your own reaction to being guided in what you should be seeing.
So everything you all have said, whether it's bringing the emotional or the personal into the artwork experience, or reading your audience and not being interpreted for, all of that is what we're going to try to give you mechanisms to avoid and ways to foster that personal connection, that experiential, or an experience with the piece, or the pieces. And I just lost where that was going. What happens, and I am a product of this, I do this often, we understand these things in context, and maybe it's the amount that we've all been trained. I know that, going through school and getting an education degree, it's rigid. So I do have this kind of preconceived disposition that the second I stand in front of people, I want to go back into that mode of not necessarily getting to the personal, starting to interpret for you, telling you facts when you might be getting lost. So again, we're trying to give you a few of those mechanisms to avoid that. And if you see yourself getting caught in it, okay, now I have a few tricks to launch myself back into the ways that we can help people better connect with this. And I loved that Lori was right before us in terms of really helping people make their own connections and really referring to this in a way that they can make their own stories and reinterpret this for their own stories. So Lauda's going to talk a little bit about other components that may surface, and we're going to tease out a whole bunch and then kind of bring you all back together to look at this in the context of viewing artwork.
Right, so this next topic is very dear to my heart, and it has to do with accessibility. I just want to preface our conversation by saying there are a lot of different barriers and challenges that people face when they view artworks. Some of them are inherent, some of them are constructed, some of them are physical, some of them are educational, some of them are monetary. There's a whole range. But all of them are personal, right? So who here, if you feel comfortable raising your hand, who here has a friend or family member that would face an access issue when they come to Bruce Munro? If a couple of you don't mind sharing, what would those be? Please, raise your hand.
My mother is 100 years old, and so when I bring her here, I read it on the internet today that everyone is going to have to come up on the bus. And I don't think she can get on the bus. Unless we have the kind of buses that have the things that lower and raise so that a wheelchair can come on the bus.
We do. We do have
We do
such,
have
we do have such buses.
Yeah, but sorry, keep going.
Oh, so, and the other thing that I thought about was, how difficult it will be to push her wheelchair up the hill, because I can, about walk myself up there. So I think on the night that I come and bring her, I'm going to bring my grandson.
Smart.
To help with that, but it's the bus thing that has currently got me stymied.
And how does it feel when you think about that barrier? Like, how does it make you feel?
How does that make me feel?
Yeah.
Well, I've put in many, many years of my life at this location. And I like to share it with my mom, and she likes to come up here, but she's really getting to the point where she can't handle it herself.
Yeah.
So when you are that old, there are very few things that you can do. Your body just doesn't cooperate anymore, and I'd like to be able to bring this to her.
Yeah. So, if I put myself in that situation, think about my own family member, I might feel disappointment or frustration. Or maybe even scared of like, oh, I have to be anxious and worried about how I take care of her at this point. So physical access is definitely, will be a challenge here. It's going to be at night. It's going to be uphill and downhill and all different terrain. It might be cold. The weather, might not be in our favor every time. So really being aware of who's there, where are the resources on the property, how can you quickly direct somebody? You really need to be very familiar with the map and the property. How can you quickly direct somebody to a restroom, to a warm place, to a place where they can sit down? There's going to be a lot of walking and standing. Where's our accessible ADA bathroom? Where's that? So you always kind of try to put yourself into someone's situation and think, how can I make this easier for them? That was a great example. Thank you, Linda. Can I get one more that's maybe not related to physical? Has anyone experienced something else?
I may be way off topic, but I'm not quite understanding it. People are going to come to the exhibit and be led through it. Or if they're going to come to the exhibit and be guided, but go independently throughout it. If you're going independently, it's an intimate experience, almost like breastfeeding. You can't direct it. It will come from the inside of the person.
Okay.
And so I'm wondering, how are these tours? Are they going to all be guided? Are people going to wander through on their own? How is that going to work?
I believe it's a mixture.
So it's a little bit of both. So for the most part, the general public will be coming on a bus. They'll be dropped off, and they will be free to follow a path that will be outlined in your pamphlet brochure. But it's not restricted to that pathway that is designated in your brochure. You're free to roam the property and visit pieces. Please step in where I am wrong and look at them however you want and spend as much time taking in a piece. We do have some docent tours that we're kind of trying to figure out right now, but those will be on select nights where people can sign up for a time slot and a docent will lead them through each piece and walk through the entire exhibit. But for the most part, it's an independent experience.
And all the children's tours, class tours will be docent-led.
Exactly.
Those, yes.
So the ones that we have in place that are absolute at this point in time are our daytime school student tours, our family nights, which we're looking at almost a consistent rotation of hour on the hour, so we may need a few of you for those. And then looking at, we talked about last week, VIP tours that we may request support on, and then looking at the possibility of perhaps a one-time slot on Sundays, but that has not been solidified. But yes, for all the school tours and family nights, those are dates that we securely have in place.
So, one of the question I have is when someone just walks in, will we be telling them that if you want a docent to help you, tell you a bit more about the exhibit, otherwise how will they know that there is something?
Let me just jump in. For those of you who weren't with us last week, we have a map, and it can be found on the resources page on the website. And there are also on the table. So we position docents in sort of key locations around the grounds. We'll also have volunteers that night. So there's going to be multiple people knowing where the bathroom are. We'll have staff on. We'll have key staff in charge and staff in different positions. But our docents will be identified in a particular way. They're going to be the people you can stop and engage with and talk, and they're going to be you all engaging the public in what they're seeing. So on most nights, our docents are going to be those people who, probably more than most of our colleagues will have the most information about the show or how to take somebody through a journey with the show. Yeah.
Will the public be informed of these resources when they're on the bus on the way up here?
Yeah, we'll be sending out, Leah is working on sort of a memo that will go to people, 3 days before their tour to say, in preparation, these are the things you're going to need, this is what you'll find on site, this is how you'll find our docents, they'll have more information.
Kelly, one more. Will the docents go with the same group all the way around, or will the docents be assigned to a particular
Unless it's a night, like
district?
Charlie mentioned, when we have a tour scheduled, or you're touring a school group, you'll be in a particular location, and you'll be there as resource. But you'll have the capacity on those nights when, oh my God, we've all of a sudden got 40 VIPs and I need 3 people to help me. You'll be able to grab a group of people and take them.
All right.
I'm sorry.
If we could, I'd like to redirect this back toward our educational goals. I know you're all really excited to give tours and you want to know exactly how it's going to work out and happen. But we do have 2 more trainings that we can talk about, logistics and all of those things. So if you could hold those questions till the end. There's another very important topic that I am going to try to guide the conversation toward. So let's say that you had the money to pay for a ticket. You had the time to take your evening off to come to Montalvo. You found childcare. You are physically able to walk the property. What might be one last obstacle that you would face when being presented with this contemporary art that maybe you've never seen before?
What stuff?
What?
Rain.
Rain, okay, yes, rain is definitely, might even stop you from coming. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody,
Many
well,
people,
no, I'm gonna tell
many
you.
people are
Just
not familiar
exposure.
with contemporary art.
Yes,
They think of the grand masters that you see in the museums, and that's art.
yes, thank you, Jane. So, you all might have a strong background in art and that's what already brought you here, but put yourself in the position of somebody that didn't grow up, never has taken anything to do with art history, maybe minimal art education throughout their elementary or high school years. This might be really off-putting to them. It might be magical and wonderful, but they might be sitting there thinking, what is this? Is this art? Has anyone ever on their docenting had somebody on their tour that said, I don't get it, I don't like it?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you do with that person? What have you done in the past with that comment? Oh, you kick him out. Okay. Yeah. Any other suggestions of what to do?
It goes back to your other sheet here that talks to them about relating to it personally.
Yeah.
Don't think of it as art, just think of it as, look at it and experience it.
Yeah. That's where inquiry is really on our side, assessing your audience, knowing how to relate back to them. Somebody else had an arm raised. I want to get that point in. No. Any other solutions for what to do?
What?
In the back.
anybody who's been to Disneyland's gonna love it. The kids love the parade of lights.
Yes.
No one's gonna hate this, I'm
You
sorry.
don't know. There might be some judgments. I think that a great way to redirect it would be, what don't you like about it?
Or how would you make it artsy?
How would you change it? Make sure that you ask them about their opinion and then say, you know what, well, art is all subjective, you know, everybody's experiencing it differently. So let me help explain what the artist was thinking. Maybe you'll think about it differently after. And if they don't think about it differently after, that's okay. That's their opinion. It is absolutely valid. And the last thing I want to add is your vocabulary. So keep in mind that when you used art-specific terms like installation, they might not have ever heard that in context of their regular life before. So you might want to, as you go, still use the vocabulary that you want to use, but make sure that you define it as you go. So if you're saying that this installation is very transient or something, you could say like it's not here for that long or it's not going to last this long. You know, define it as you go, and that will really help. Instead of putting up a barrier of a vocabulary barrier or language barrier, which is a whole other thing to think about, that you're helping explain the terms as you go, and then you're building their knowledge too. I see a couple more hands raised as I was talking, so maybe this is lighting up some ideas. Right here, and then over there.
So one of the things that, you know, we appreciate art, and as you say, it's very subjective, but the other thing that might excite someone is the technology. You know, and we haven't addressed that at all. And so that could be a question that somebody says, you know, well, I don't like the colors, or I don't like this, or I don't understand it. But I think if you reach down to a level that they can join in with, you know, then they have a better appreciation.
Yeah, and I think Pauline will dive into some of that when we go piece by piece next week. All of the really, really fun facts that absolutely would fascinate anyone.
And then I see a persistent hand in the back.
I just had a question. Are we going to have any language specific tours? Because I'm thinking there may be people that come that have limited English ability and may in fact want some help in other languages.
I'm going to throw that to Kelly because I think we have some audio guide options and
Who speaks another language?
actually that is great to know. Who speaks another language here?
So who speaks Mandarin? Who speaks
Okay.
Russian? Who speaks Vietnamese? Who speaks Spanish? So we have this app, and you should have instructions to get there. We will translate it into those 4 languages. And you know, our hope, we will do the best we can, that each night one of the docents on site does speak another language. You can't be here 77 nights, period. So, you know, we're gonna have to do the best we can. But guiding somebody to the app and letting them know that they can pull, you know, Bruce's own description of the work in their native language would be terrific. So
And
that
for-
is all in the works and will be developed before we open.
For all of you who did just raise your hand, if you are willing, please make yourself known to the education department. We have so many immersion schools that are unable to participate in our programs unless we can do a program in multiple languages. So if you're willing to help and can make yourselves known, that would be enormous.
Yeah, and maybe make yourselves known to Karen and Amanda as well.
Mhm.
That'd be great. Thank you.
We could write it on the list.
That would be.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That might be an easy way to do it.
Thank you.
Good words right here, that would be great.
All right, so just to recap, we have a lot of different people coming here from the public with all different barriers, challenges, background knowledge. And, you know, we're going to be teaching you a lot of different techniques, but we want you to always come back to certain themes or through lines, some very generative questions that we think will tie right into Munro. And Mark is going to introduce those.
So at the bottom of your page, we have these 6 questions. There's 3 for adults and 3 for youth. And these are what we're going to be referring to as our guiding questions. And these guiding questions you can think of as almost your themes for guiding conversation to kind of look at how you can guide a conversation for the individual experience with the artwork and the overall exhibit here at Montalvo. We don't want them to just come here and view it. We want them to start thinking about the exhibit on a deeper level. So for the first question under the adult section, we have, how does Monroe's artwork transform this place? And why would this be an important question for an adult coming to Montalvo and seeing it, whether that is that they've been here multiple times, or they've been seeing, or this is their first time ever coming to Montalvo, they saw it on TV and they come to the property.
For me, is even when I walk at night over here, I view Montalvo more like a classy setting, if you want to call it, the architecture that is. So seeing the technology involved, the fiber optic, the LED, and all the other stuff, that brings kind of like quite a contrast with the architecture of the building. So
Definitely.
it just transforms.
You could probably get a sense of the group, whether they're into, if they say, oh, it's very magical, or they're more techy. You could probably get a sense of the group in the audience. Be like, okay, maybe I talk more about Narnia, maybe I talk more about, the artist. So.
Did I see one more hand over here? No? Perfect. And the second question that we have down here is, how does this immersive installation inspire wonder, awe, and imagination? And how could you picture this question being tied to this installation from the images that you have seen or your own research?
Say that again?
How does this immersive installation inspire wonder, awe, and imagination?
No, it's what you said after that.
Oh, how could that question be related to this exhibit? Like, why would it be important from what you have seen in the pictures or the videos that you have seen of Bruce's work so far?
For me, it's kind of like the light show at Disney World or Disneyland. It's like, no matter what your age is, it's like, it makes you feel different. The lights do have that magical quality.
And do we know what the term immersive installation means?
That you become a part of it.
Speaking of
You're
the
walking
Yeah.
through it.
Especially if you're part of it.
Burning Man.
I'm sorry?
I'm saying, well, that you are walking through it and being a part of it, the scale of it, you're surrounded by it.
Definitely. And Bruce Munro, as we've been saying, has been very inspired by the storybooks of Narnia. And one of these things, like, you'll be literally immersed in this sea of light with the Silver Sea. So what would that, as a person coming to Montalvo, maybe for the first time, and standing there, staring from the front balcony, looking down at this vast lawn just covered in lights, what that experience would be, taking you back to childhood and feeling that experience. And then the third question that we have for the adults is, how does beauty provide a chance to return to innocence? And once again, we're just kind of tying back into that idea of being inspired by a storybook from your childhood. And so Bruce Munro came here, he had that revelation from the Dawn Treader, like the villa was from that story, and how it just sparked that one moment, this entire exhibit here at Montalvo. And that's something we want people to come here, experience his work, and how does that inspire you and bring you back to your childhood and inspire something in your life. And then for youth, we have the first question, how does Monroe's artwork transform this place? It's the same as adults. We want kids taking away the same kind of thought process behind that as we did with the adults. The second one is slightly different. How has this exhibit changed what you think art is? And I'll repeat that one more time. How has this exhibit changed what you think art is?
That might apply to adults depending on what they've set up to that point.
Definitely.
I almost think the younger generation is going to have less of a strong concept because they're so into electronic things.
Definitely.
That for them, this is not going to be so far off in terms of what art is.
That's very good point.
But that also might be a good question for the adults too. That's not just, sometimes adults on those might than children.
Definitely. And I wouldn't put these into a box of just these are for the adults and these are for the youth. As you're going through your tours, these are just guiding questions. These aren't questions that you have to sit there and ask them. These are things for you to think about as you're talking about pieces. And then the third question we have on that youth side, how does art help you imagine a new world? And once again, we're tying it back to Narnia, reading, being inspired by that place, and then creating an entire world installation here at Montalvo, and hopefully inspiring them to go off and make their own world. With the amount of time that we have left, we're going to be breaking up into 3 groups, and we are going to be looking at 3 different installations. So I think
I'll pause you there for a moment. I just want to underscore what Mark is saying to be very, very explicit, that the expectation in these questions is not for you to be reading them and asking them of everyone. That over the next few days, we're going to give you some techniques that are probably going to be new, and some of you may hold them, remember them, and use them, and if you can't, that's not detrimental, but if you can't hold on to those specific methods, then just these big general themes and questions in your mind. It's everything that Kelly talked about to start in terms of Bruce's work, his general inspirations, his inspirations here, what Lori then talked about in terms of this theme of narrative and fantasy across time, across literature genres, that these are the big questions that we want folks asking and responses to this going home with them in a very personal way. So again, we're going to keep giving you techniques, and we hope it doesn't freak you out. And if those aren't ones that feel comfortable to you, these just overarching themes in your mind as you're walking folks around is the goal with these.
And I guess one thing I'd add too is that at the end of the day, hospitality,
yeah.
You want people to come away from this feeling like they want to come back, they want to contribute to it, support it, send friends to it, that they were welcomed warmly, that they were exhilarated and awed, and if they don't remember anything else, and they come away with that feeling of wanting to be part of this place's future, I think it's a win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, are you going to rotate, if you just said 3 groups, so then we're going to all shift so we all get to see all 3?
Well, so as we talked about at the beginning in terms of our philosophy, that the best way to learn is to experience and to do it firsthand. So we thought that we would kind of plant a seed with one kind of creative learning mechanism that we'd like to walk you all through, but out of size of the group, and so that maybe we can participate in a deeper level. We'll engage in, or we'll break into 3 groups, and all 3 of us are going to take you to a different piece to show you one technique that is called See, Think, Wonder.
But then do we get to go see all 3 of the pieces tonight?
Not tonight, but it will come. It will come.
Anticipation, Jane.
So I think maybe I know. I think the best way to do this is to maybe quickly do 1, 2, 3 throughout the crowd, and then we'll do 1, 2, 3, if that works. Can I start on this end?
Yeah, go from all 6.
Okay. So she's 1, and you're 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
2.
1. Rule breaker. Don't think I don't know where you all live. 2. Oh, I'm back over here then. 3. Yeah, I think. You were 2?
Yes.
3.
2. 1, 3.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
I'm already mostly through the group, folks. 1, 3.
1, 2.
2. 1. 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3.
Before we all disperse, just one last really quick thing. For those of you that didn't get your handouts, they're over there on the table. There are 3 of them. One of them is the press release for the exhibition. One of them is the didactic text that's going in the exhibition brochure. And the third one, most exciting of all, is a transcription of Bruce Munro talking about each of the installations. So you can get those now, you can get them later, but I really want you to have them all. It's really interesting.
So I'm going to keep my voice lower than my normal volume because loud is right there and I don't want to conflict too much. But I'm curious first and foremost, who is very, very familiar with Montalvo and our history? Okay, who feels very, very familiar with Bruce Munro's work? Okay, who feels a little familiar with Bruce Munro's work? All right, who knows a little bit about light installation in terms of some of the technical components? Okay.
An engineer.
Okay, okay. So this piece here, and to clarify, what I'm going to do for you is model the questioning process and then kind of deconstruct it for you. So that was my taking some assessment of who's in the group. And when it comes to a technical question, I may say, we have an engineer in the group. I'm going to have to find something, but I'm not the expert on everything. So one technique that we love to use within the learning process around looking at art is see, think, wonder. And first I will kind of demonstrate it, and then we can kind of tear it apart and get a better sense of what's actually happening. So see is physical, what you observe, what you are witnessing. Think is some element of interpretation. I think they are installing for this mechanism. I think it's going to turn into this. And then wonder are exactly the points that Bruce is trying to take us to in terms of what are all the questions that start to surface? What do I start to become really curious about with this? So I'm going to give you all just a minute to kind of personally reflect on that and then ask a couple folks to share out. And it is in process, I understand. It takes imagination at this point. So I'm wondering if I can have 2 or 3 people just tell me something that they see.
Well, first of all, those are raindrops.
Raindrops, okay.
And those wheels, if they are real wire and it's gonna be electric current running there is a magnetic field inside.
Okay.
So it might be probably something moving in and out.
Okay. So what I hear from you is a little bit more thinking than seeing, that you're making an interpretation.
I see
so
rain.
you see raindrops.
Rain.
Okay, you
probably
see raindrops.
Those are clouds,
Sure.
and those clouds might be turning or something.
Okay.
By let's say technical part.
Sure.
Magnetic field
Sure.
that will go from current.
Okay.
If there is one.
Right. Does someone see something different?
See mussels, mussel shells.
Okay. One more C.
It's the beginning of
Yeah, I see
something
something
that's
in
maybe
process.
going to be going back all the way,
Yes.
maybe?
Okay, and what do you see that makes you think that?
Well, I see that these loops are down here, that they've been brought down. So it looks to me like they're starting at this side and they're going to be moving back and adding more muscles as they go, and all of those are going to come down.
Okay, so that actually is a good segue into think. I'm wondering what a couple people are thinking, if 1 or 2 might be willing to share what they start to think about as they interpret what they see.
I'm wondering if
Actually, I
there'll be
see
more mussel
teardrops.
shells.
You see teardrops as well. And I'm sorry, what was yours?
If there'll be more mussel shells on every single strand.
Okay.
And rain.
And where
One
do the
more
mussel
think.
shells come from?
Okay.
When they all come down, are they going to blow in the wind?
Okay. So again, I'm hearing with some of these now, wonder. I wonder, will they all come down in the wind? I wonder if there will be more mussel shells. Any more about think?
I think the artist wants to contrast the natural with the artificial.
And what do you see that makes you think that?
I see animals contrasted with artificial materials.
Okay. And then maybe a couple more wonders. What do we start to become curious about? What questions emerge with this piece?
So this silver threads kind of you see, those are fiber optics. So that question can come up. That question can come up. What are these?
Yep.
It's just a plastic thread or what?
So if these are mussel shells and they, right here, they, to me, they look pretty much the same in shape and size. So are they from nature or are they manufactured?
That's fabulous. Anyone wonder what the heck this might have to do with Narnia?
Well, I wonder what kinds of lights will be turned on.
Each one of those shells gonna glow?
So, this is now the opportunity for me as the facilitator or docent to garner all of that information from your pre-existing knowledge, as well as what you've been able to observe, think about, and what questions still remain, to answer some of those questions, and then we can engage in dialogue. I love that someone that moved saw teardrops. Teardrops. You saw teardrops, and you saw teardrops, and then some raindrops. Sorry, raindrops. And you said teardrops?
Yeah.
So raindrops are an absolute theme within Bruce's work, and you will see that when you get to tour the light shower piece that's in our solarium. But these are actually mussel shells, and they are not actual mussel shells. Someone had the curiosity around or seeing that relationship between man-made and fabricated, man-made and natural. And these are in fact cast out of a polymer, and they are in fact replicated mussel shells. Someone also started to observe and question the process that's unfolding, and it is really unique for all of you to be able to see this in process, to then be able to talk more with the folks that you tour around about what has actually happened. So the process was that 1,200 fiber optic strands were attached to our upper truss at about this level. I'm coming back to you, Leah, I promise. And after those were installed, the whole truss was raised up to a very precise height that had been pre-calculated by Bruce and his studio, because what has since happened is one strand falls at a time, or they descend it one at a time. Again, 1,200 strands. And what is on a single curtain, and there are 24 layers that go back, what is on a single curtain is roughly 750 mollusk shells. So in totality, you have 54 rows this way, 24 curtains going back, 750 shells on each one, totaling 18,000 shells that will be the entire height, width, and length of what is generally our garden theater stage. In terms of the fiber optics, I was able to get some inside information from some folks today who were installing, and I should say around the install, what has happened here is they pull this down. There are stoppers on the fiber optics that keep the shells from sliding too much further down, and then at the end is a 5-ounce weight that holds it taut, and they will do this one row at a time. It has taken them the entirety of the weekend to try just the first curtain. Now they will speed up as they go, because this is a piece that is being installed. It was created and installed for the first time right here. So they're in a little bit of a learning curve to figure this out. In terms of how it gets lit, because I'm looking up and I'm thinking, well, where does the light come from? That is why they have built these lower basins, these lower boxes, because there will be, and this is what I'm learning about fiber optic, evidently, and many of us probably know that light bends, and specifically with fiber optic, the light will follow that fiber with all of its twists and turns. So in many of the pieces, you can see that the individual fiber optic strands are essentially melded into a single block that then becomes kind of the transceiver for all of the light. So they will actually have that underneath the stage, underneath these platforms, and it will light from underneath going up. Does anyone know the story of Reepicheep, or Reepicheep's role within Narnia? So the title of this piece is Reepicheep's Wave. Anyone feel like they know this story really well and probably better than me? So Reepicheep, I just cheated this weekend and watched the movie. But Reepicheep is this tenacious mouse character that surfaces in the second book, which is Prince Caspian. And he fights on the side of good, both in restoring Prince Caspian's right to the throne and in the Dawn Treader, helping the Dawn Treader recollect the 7 swords of the fallen soldiers that essentially return good back to Narnia. And in the final parts, and I don't want to ruin the story for anyone, but this piece really does kind of spoil. At the end of that tale, there is a wave that separates Narnia from the home of Aslan. And Aslan is the lion, who you probably remember from The Witch in the Wardrobe, Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe. And Reepicheep makes this courageous, selfless, and pivotal decision to walk through the wave, which you can never return back through. So what you can't see in the low light right now is that the mollusk shells are actually in a wave shape that you will see again through all of those 24 layers back. So it's both relating back to that story as well as the physical principles of Hokusai. Some of you may know his wood carvings with the wave pieces. So both have become inspirations for this piece.
How long did it take you to watch the movies? How much, what's the time commitment?
They're about 2.5 hours, but I'm one of those horrible movie watchers where I'm working and I'm doing dishes, and so I don't ever sit and watch things. So it felt like it went by very quickly. My kitchen looks amazing.
But what's the time commitment?
To watch all 3 of them, they're about 2.5 hours each.
Okay.
The silver chair is meant to be the 4th, but hasn't been produced. And the last one came out in 2008, so there's speculation that it won't be. But you have The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and the Dawn Treader all available. And many of the pieces specifically refer to stories in the Dawn Treader. Although I would tell you if I didn't watch the first 2, I would have been a little lost come Dawn Treader.
Okay.
Yeah.
What happens if we have a real big windstorm with this kind of an installation?
Well, so that's curious because as they were installing, there was a light breeze, and part of what some of the installers were saying are these unexpected results that they can see from time to time when they're installing new pieces are factors like the wind, and it was sweet. I mean, the wind has died down at this point, but this whole first wave was just honestly like a curtain, and that's why I started calling them curtains, because it just had this sweet sway to it. Now, are those 5-ounce weights, fishing weights, going to be enough in heavy winds? To be determined, but honestly, it's a rarity that we see winds very strong up here. We did want to regather, and I do want to take your question, we did want to regather back in the gallery real quick, but I'll take this last question or comment.
How much total time take them to install all these?
Well, so they just started the install last week, and they'll probably finish within this week. Again, it took them the whole weekend just to bring these strands down. So what you see at least hanging and in place took the entirety of the weekend.
So probably around 2 weeks?
2 weeks, maybe 3 is what's been loosely held. Yeah.
So it'll be done by the 25th.
It should be, yes. So I'm just curious, how many folks feel like that was helpful in terms of better understanding both pre-assessing knowledge as well as the technique around See, Think, Wonder? Perfect, excellent. I'm glad you were in group 1. Yeah.